What was something you wrongly guessed as very expensive cheap when you were a child? Rugs. Why are rugs so f***ing expensive? I always thought Viennetta ice cream was so posh and expensive. It never occurred to me that some food was more expensive than other food. I 100% thought my mom made spaghetti all the time because it was her favorite. I was much older when I realized it was because it would feed a lot of people very cheap. I have kind of a funny story that is related. I got an allowance even when I was really young, but it was only a few dollars a week. When I was probably 6 or 7, we were at the mall and I saw a sign for golden retriever puppies for $2.99. Naturally, I assumed this was $2.99. I went into the store and proudly put $3 on the counter only to be told I would need a lot more than that. As an adult, I also look back and I can't imagine what my parents would have done if I had somehow had enough to purchase a dog despite the fact that we already had 2 at the time. The cost of building a fort that connected my backyard to my friend's backyard still hasn't happened. The dentist didn't think I'd be in debt from getting teeth fixed. When I was a child, I thought an average car costs like $100K. Food in the cupboard, fridge. When you're young, a lot of the time it's just there. When you get older, especially when you move out, you realize how much money your parents spent to keep you fed. Food coloring and fondant icing for baking. Thought it was too expensive and that's why only fancy cakes used them. Turns out they cost like £1 each. Legos, those things are expensive. Houses. Used to think they were like £500. Figured credit cards meant infinite money. Turns out they do for a little bit if you're real stupid. Which I was. Going out to anything other than fast food was an expensive night out. Even Applebee's. College. My oldest brother and all his friends went to college, never mentioning the expense. As a kid, I thought it must be cheap because all the guys are doing it. Cell phones. I remember looking at phone covers in a store magazine. They were $20. I then realized I had $20 and got so excited to buy a new phone. I got disappointed when I realized they were just covers. Phones were so customizable and diverse back then. Gas. During the early 70s, all the adults were saying that it was high. Then they would say that it's coming down. Then back up. Then it's cheap. I never could figure out a median price. Concrete statues. Our neighbors had 2 lions at the end of their driveway, in a very modest neighborhood, and I thought they must be the richest people in the world. Pants. Anyone who has ever shopped for pants knows they cost almost triple what a t-shirt costs. Double what shorts cost, and the same or slightly less than jackets, hoodies, jumpers. They are a lot more expensive than what you think they are as a child. Didn't understand volume. Thought in-app purchases for $1 would never cost anything despite how many times it was bought. Glad my parents had a password. Cars for sure. When I was young, I figured just about everyone made something like $75,000 per year salary, so all that money could be spent on a car and would only take 1 year to pay for a real nice car. Video games were crazy expensive, but that's the only thing I cared about. So when I looked at X item, I would compare it to video game prices, 40 to 60 USD. In other words, I would look at something and think that costs like half a video game. With that amount, I could get 3 video games. That's like a quarter of a video game. I kept doing this until I reached 17. Well, when I was very young, I used to think things' value, cost was determined by how many $1 bills could fit into it. As in, to buy a car, stuff it with ones and then that's how much you owe the seller. Curtains. Never thought of them being valuable. Guess what? If you have someone make them fit your place, they cost a fortune. Always thought clothing was cheap. Wasn't until I was in college that I realized I always had new clothing because my mom never bought anything for herself for like 15 years. My middle school-age son organized his first trip with 3 of his friends to the movies without parents. I bought the tickets beforehand and gave him $40 for snacks and drinks. After dropping him off, I took my youngest to the arcade across from the theater, and while we were there, caught a glimpse of my son walking into the theater with his friends, all of them holding large slushies. My son had a definite holy poop look on his face. When I picked him up a few hours later, he said to me, "I offered to buy my friend slushies and told the guy medium, but then he handed us these big-ass drinks and said it was $38. Now ever since, he's been asking me things like, "Do I have any bonds? Quote, comma, how much does less than radio DJ, animator, doctor greater than make? Quote, comma, how do I get a trust fund? Lol, sorry kid, I just had a little extra from working overtime." Disneyland. Honestly, I didn't really have a guess on how much a ticket was, but we got to go every couple of years, so I figured it was no big deal. My mom used to buy a lot of fancy-looking drinking glasses, and I always tried my best to treat them with care. I broke one of them one time and started to freak out, thinking that my mom would be pissed. She came in and saw the broken glass, and I started profusely apologizing. She laughed and told me that she wasn't mad over a cheap $1 glass from Dollar Tree. I was shook. Those self-stick bows you put on gifts. I used to think they were super expensive because everyone in my family used them over and over. We had a few that we used so much they were recognizable. We had a few fancy ones. Wrapping paper too, based on how careful my family was about not tearing it and how my grandmother would fold it. I figured it must be really expensive. Yeah, both are super cheap. Medical care. My parents both had government jobs with good insurance, so they didn't even have to pay co-pays. When writing compositions in primary school, I'd give my characters a $5,000 fine for jaywalking.